Picture standing on the shores of the ancient Mediterranean thousands of years ago, where the line between reality and legend blurred into something extraordinary. This was a world where gods walked among mortals, where sea monsters lurked in uncharted waters, and where every whisper of the wind carried a story that defied explanation. These weren't just tales, they were the lifeblood of cultures, shaping how people understood everything from the rising sun to the mysteries of death. And some of these myths, they were so bizarre, so utterly unexpected, that even today they leave us scratching our heads in wonder. What if I told you that in one ancient story, a goddess was born from the severed genitals of a sky god? Or that a king once tricked death itself only to pay a price so strange, it's hard to believe it was ever dreamed up. These aren't the polished, sanitized versions of myths we often hear. These are the raw, uncensored stories that emerged from the minds of people trying to make sense of a world filled with chaos and wonder. From talking statues to cities vanishing beneath the waves, the ancient Mediterranean was a hotspot for tales that pushed the limits of imagination. This journey isn't just about recounting odd stories, it's about stepping into the minds of those who told them. Why did they believe a giant could hold up the sky? What drove them to imagine a labyrinth hiding a half-bull, half-man monster? These myths were more than entertainment, they were maps of meaning, ways to explain the unexplainable. And as we unravel 30 of the most bizarre legends from this region, you'll start to see how these ancient whispers still echo in our world today. So settle in, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. Deep beneath the palace of King Minos, hidden within a maze so complex no one could escape, lurked a monster unlike any other. The Minotaur, a grotesque fusion of man and bull that feasted on human flesh. But this wasn't just some random horror story. The myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth was born from a tangled web of power, betrayal, and divine punishment. It all started when King Minos of Crete, eager to prove his right to rule, asked the sea god Poseidon for a sign. The god sent a magnificent white bull from the waves, a symbol of favor, but there was a catch. Minos was supposed to sacrifice the bull to honor Poseidon. Instead, he kept it for himself, an act of arrogance that would doom his kingdom. Poseidon's revenge was as twisted as the labyrinth itself. He made Minos' queen, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. The result, the Minotaur, a monstrous child that became a living reminder of the king's greed. Trapped in the maze designed by the genius inventor Daedalus, the creature demanded a gruesome tribute. 7 young men and 7 young women from Athens, delivered every 9 years to be devoured. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. The Athenian hero Theseus volunteered to be one of the sacrifices, determined to end the horror. With the help of Minos' daughter, Ariadne, who gave him a magical thread to navigate the maze, Theseus slew the beast and escaped. Yet the real mystery isn't just the monster, it's the labyrinth itself. Archaeologists believe the myth may have roots in the sprawling, maze-like ruins of the Minoan palace at Knossos, where frescoes of bull leaping hint at a culture obsessed with these powerful animals. Was the Minotaur pure fiction, or a symbolic warning against human arrogance? Or could it have been inspired by real gladiatorial games where prisoners faced off against bulls? Whatever the truth, this myth endures because it's more than a monster story. It's a tale of consequences, courage, and the dark twists of fate that even kings couldn't escape. While the Minotaur ruled the land with brute terror, the seas held a different kind of nightmare creatures whose voices were deadlier than any sword. The Sirens, often depicted as half-bird, half-woman beings, perched on jagged cliffs or hidden islands, their songs so mesmerizing that sailors would leap overboard or steer their ships straight into the rocks. But unlike other monsters, the Sirens didn't rely on claws or fangs. Their weapon was something far more intimate, the irresistible power of music and words. Homer's Odyssey gives us the most famous encounter with these deadly enchantresses. As Odysseus sails home from Troy, the sorceress Circe warns him that no man can hear the Sirens' song and survive with his mind intact. But Odysseus, ever the cunning hero, devises a loophole. He orders his crew to plug their ears with beeswax while he's tied to the mast, close enough to hear the Sirens' voices but powerless to act on them. The scene that follows is haunting. The Sirens don't just sing pretty tunes, they whisper promises of infinite knowledge, claiming to know everything, the secrets of the Trojan War, the fate of every soul. We know all things, they croon, preying on Odysseus' pride. It's a psychological trap tailored to exploit the deepest desires of those who hear it. What makes this myth so chilling is how it mirrors real dangers ancient sailors faced. Imagine being weeks into a voyage, exhausted and disoriented, when faint singing drifts across the water. Were the Sirens inspired by actual natural phenomena? Some historians suggest they could symbolize the eerie, wind-driven sounds that echo near coastal caves, acoustic illusions that might have misled ships into shallow waters. Others tie them to real-life hazards like reefs or currents that dragged vessels onto the rocks. Even the Sirens' hybrid form might hint at seabirds whose cries sounded uncannily human in the fog. But the Sirens weren't just nautical warnings. They embodied a deeper fear, the peril of temptation itself. In later traditions, they became symbols of the destructive pull of desire, whether for forbidden knowledge, pleasure, or even artistic inspiration. One Roman writer claimed their songs grew mournful after Odysseus escaped, as if their power depended on human weakness. By the Middle Ages, artists began portraying them as mermaid-like figures, a shift that reflected new anxieties about female seduction. And here's the twist: the Sirens' greatest weakness was their own obsession. Legends say they were fated to die if any sailor resisted their song. When Odysseus sails past unharmed, the Sirens plunge into the sea, vanishing in a whirlpool of their own making. It's a paradox, creatures so powerful, yet doomed by the very thing that gave them power. That's why this myth endures. It's not just about monsters, it's about the battles we fight against our own impulses, the voices that whisper just this once, and the cost of giving in. So the next time you hear a catchy tune or a too-good-to-be-true promise, remember, the most dangerous traps don't always look monstrous. Sometimes they sound like a song. If you thought the Sirens were terrifying, wait until you meet their neighbors, the Cyclopes, towering one-eyed brutes who didn't just kill their victims but savored them like fine wine. The most infamous of these horrors was Polyphemus, the cave-dwelling giant who trapped Odysseus and his men like rats in a cellar. But here's the twist: this wasn't just some campfire boogeyman tale. The myth of the Cyclops might have sprung from a genuine archaeological mix-up that had ancient Greeks staring at elephant skulls and seeing monsters. Picture Odysseus, battered by storms and desperate for supplies, stumbling upon what seems like an abandoned cave, only to discover it's the larder of a cannibal. Polyphemus isn't just strong, he's grotesquely cunning, sealing the entrance with a boulder no mortal could move. When the Greeks scream for mercy, he responds by smashing two men against the walls and devouring them raw. Homer's description is stomach-churning, the giant belching chunks of human flesh, washing it down with milk, and laughing as he plans to eat the rest piece by piece. But why a single eye? Here's where reality bleeds into myth. Centuries before Homer, fossilized dwarf elephant skulls littered Mediterranean islands like Sicily, remnants of creatures that died out long before humans arrived. To a Bronze Age sailor, these skulls would have looked unnatural. A single, gaping nasal cavity in the center where the trunk attached could easily be mistaken for an enormous eye socket. Add imagination to that discovery, and suddenly you've got a race of one-eyed terrors lurking in the hills. The Polyphemus story takes another bizarre turn when Odysseus blinds the giant with a red-hot stake. As the Cyclops flails, screaming that nobody has hurt him, a pun on Odysseus' fake name, his brothers ignore his cries because who would fear an attacker named Nobody? It's darkly comic but also revealing. These giants weren't just monsters, they were cautionary symbols of brute strength undone by wit. Later versions of the myth got even stranger, painting Polyphemus as a lovesick fool pining for the sea nymph Galatea, proof that even the most savage myths could evolve into something unexpected. So were Cyclopes pure fiction, maybe not entirely. Fossil misunderstandings aside, they might have also embodied very real fears of isolated, lawless shepherds preying on travelers. After all, a bandit chieftain holed up in a mountain cave would have been as monstrous to ancient Greeks as any fairy tale ogre. What makes this myth endure isn't just the horror, it's the unsettling idea that sometimes the line between man and monster is thinner than we'd like to admit. Of all the monsters that haunted the ancient Mediterranean, none struck fear quite like Medusa, the Gorgon whose very glance could turn flesh to stone. But her story wasn't always one of pure terror. Once she was a beautiful priestess in the temple of Athena, until a tragic encounter with the sea god Poseidon left her cursed, her hair transformed into writhing snakes, her face so hideous it petrified anyone who met her eyes. This twist raises a haunting question. Was Medusa truly a monster or a victim punished for the crimes of a god? The hero Perseus' quest to behead her reads like an ancient heist movie. Given an impossible mission by a tyrant who wanted him dead, Perseus needed divine gadgets to even stand a chance. Hermes lent him winged sandals to fly, Hades provided a helm of invisibility, and Athena handed him a mirrored shield, the ultimate workaround to avoid eye contact. The most chilling detail, Medusa's sisters, immortal Gorgons who slept beside her, would wake the moment her head was severed. Perseus had one shot: strike fast, grab the head, and vanish before they could react. Yet the myth lingers not just for its action, but for its contradictions. Ancient artisans painted Medusa's face on shields and doorways as a protective charm, turning the monster into a guardian against evil. Even in death, her severed head remained potent, dropped onto battlefields to petrify enemies or used by Athena to adorn her own shield. And here's the strangest twist. From Medusa's spilled blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, a symbol of poetic inspiration. How could something so grotesque birth something so sublime? Archaeologists have found Medusa-like figures in Neolithic art, suggesting her roots run deeper than Greece. Some scholars argue her snake hair and stony gaze symbolize ancient fears of female power, while others see her as a warning about the dangers of forbidden desire. The real horror of Medusa's myth isn't just the petrification, it's how easily beauty can be twisted into terror, and how the line between cursed and divine hinges on who tells the tale. So next time you see her snarling face in a museum, look closer. That's not just a monster, that's a mirror. Imagine a creature so defiant of death that when its time came, it didn't fade away, it erupted into flames, only to emerge newborn from the ashes. The phoenix wasn't just a bird, it was a cosmic reset button, a symbol of time itself folding back onto its own beginning. But this myth's origins are as layered as the cycles it represents. Long before it became a Christian metaphor for resurrection, the phoenix first took flight in the scorching deserts of ancient Egypt, where the sun's relentless cycle of death and rebirth shaped everything from gods to funeral rites. The Egyptian Bennu bird, often depicted as a heron with golden and crimson plumage, was said to rise with the dawn, its cries marking the moment creation renewed itself. Temple texts describe it as the soul of Ra, the sun god, carrying his light across the sky before vanishing into the twilight, only to repeat the journey the next day. But here's where the myth twists. Every 500 years, the Bennu would travel to Heliopolis, the city of the sun, and immolate itself on a pyre of sacred spices. From its remains, a worm would crawl forth, growing into the same bird within 3 days. When Greek travelers encountered this tale, they reshaped it into the phoenix we know today, a radiant eagle-like creature with feathers of fire, whose death throes were as spectacular as its rebirth. Herodotus, ever the skeptic, wrote that he'd never seen it alive, only painted. But even he couldn't resist detailing its ritual, gathering cinnamon and myrrh into a nest that would ignite under the noon sun, the bird fanning the flames with its own wings. The Romans added their own flourish. The reborn phoenix would carry its predecessor's ashes to the temple of the sun, a poignant nod to the weight of legacy. What's startling is how this myth transcended cultures without losing its core paradox: destruction as the price of renewal. Early Christians, persecuted and yearning for hope, adopted the phoenix as a secret symbol of Christ's resurrection. Catacomb paintings show it perched beside crosses, its flames mirroring the promise of eternal life. Even scientists borrowed its imagery. Alchemists saw the phoenix's cycle as the key to transmuting base metals into gold, while medieval physicians prescribed phoenix ash, likely charred herbs, as a cure-all. But perhaps the most haunting question isn't how the phoenix rises, it's why this myth persists. Maybe because it answers a fear deeper than death, the terror of being forgotten. The phoenix doesn't just live again, it carries its past into the future, a fiery thread connecting what was to what will be. In a world where empires crumble and names fade, that's a power more tantalizing than immortality itself. The Chimera wasn't just a monster, it was a walking nightmare of mismatched parts, a grotesque puzzle that should never have existed. Picture this: a lion's muscular body, its razor-clawed paws tearing up the earth, while from its back sprouted the head of a bleating goat and its tail coiled into a hissing serpent dripping venom. And as if that wasn't unsettling enough, the beast could breathe fire, turning entire landscapes into scorched wasteland. This wasn't just a random hodgepodge of creatures. The Chimera represented something deeper, an affront to nature itself, a violation of the boundaries between species that ancient minds clung to for sanity. The hero tasked with slaying this abomination was Bellerophon, a man whose own story was tangled with divine favor and mortal arrogance. Armed with a golden bridle gifted by Athena and riding the winged Pegasus born from Medusa's blood, no less, Bellerophon faced the Chimera in a battle that seemed hopeless. How do you kill something that's three predators in one? The answer lay in the very thing that made the monster unstoppable: its own fire. Ancient vase paintings show Bellerophon driving a lead-tipped spear into the Chimera's throat, the heat of its breath melting the metal, which then flooded its lungs. It's a stroke of cruel irony, the creature's greatest weapon turned against it. But here's where the myth gets even stranger. The Chimera wasn't just a figment of imagination. It may have been born from the hissing, spitting landscape of Lycia, a region in modern Turkey riddled with volcanic vents. Natural gas seeped from cracks in the earth, igniting spontaneously in the dry heat, while the rugged terrain echoed with the roars of lions, the cries of wild goats, and the rustle of snakes. To a traveler stumbling upon these fiery pits at dusk, the land itself might have seemed alive, a breathing, snarling monstrosity. The Chimera's legacy didn't end with Bellerophon's spear. It became a symbol of the unconquerable, the chaotic, and even the impossible. Medieval bestiaries depicted it as a metaphor for heresy, a fusion of ideas that shouldn't coexist. Alchemists saw it as the ultimate challenge, to master the incompatible elements of fire, earth, and venom. And today, the word chimera lives on in science, describing hybrid organisms engineered in labs, proof that the ancient fear of blurred boundaries still haunts us. So was the chimera a warning, a primal scream against the unknown, or simply a way to explain the unearthly fires that flickered in the night? Maybe it's all three. Because some myths don't just scare us, they force us to stare at the line between the possible and the unimaginable and wonder what happens when it starts to blur. Hercules faced many horrors in his legendary labors, but none tested his strength like the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent so relentless that every wound made it stronger. Nestled in the swamps of Lerna, this wasn't just a giant snake. It had multiple heads, some said as few as 9, others claimed hundreds, with a central head that was immortal. And the most horrifying twist, slice off one head and two would sprout in its place, a grotesque multiplier of rage and teeth. This wasn't just a monster, it was a biological paradox, a creature that thrived on its own destruction. The hero's battle with the Hydra became a desperate dance of strategy and brute force. Sword swings only made the problem worse, the creature's necks gushing black blood as new heads erupted like nightmare flowers. Even Hercules' legendary strength was useless here until his nephew Iolaus stepped in with a blazing torch. Together, they devised a brutal solution: sear each severed stump shut before the Hydra could regenerate. It was a grisly innovation, part surgery, part slaughter, and it worked until they reached the immortal head. That one required Hercules to bury it under a boulder, a reminder that some evils can't be killed, only contained. But the Hydra's myth wasn't just about a hero's grit. Its lair in the swamps of Lerna was said to be a gateway to the underworld, its toxic breath so potent that even its footprints were lethal. Ancient writers described the area as a place where reality frayed, where the water was undrinkable and the air thick with decay. Was this inspired by real-life sulfur springs or methane vents, places where the earth itself seemed poisoned? The Hydra's very biology mirrored the uncanny, a creature that defied the natural order, growing stronger the more you fought it. Symbolically, the Hydra became the ultimate metaphor for resilience, both the kind that inspires and the kind that terrifies. To Stoic philosophers, it represented life's endless challenges: solve one problem and two more emerge. Modern activists adopted it too, with the Hydra's head symbolizing systemic injustices that seem to multiply when confronted. Even in science, the name lives on. Hydra is a tiny freshwater creature that regenerates its entire body from fragments, proving nature's obsession with renewal runs deeper than myth. So was the Hydra just a monster, or a dark reflection of our own struggles, the way grief, oppression, or even bad habits seem to grow back no matter how hard we fight? Hercules' victory wasn't clean or easy. It was messy, collaborative, and left him permanently scarred. He dipped his arrows in the Hydra's venom, a weapon that would later haunt him. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Some battles don't end with triumph, but with a stubborn, seared-over wound, and the knowledge that survival sometimes means fighting smarter, not just harder. There's something uniquely horrifying about creatures that don't just kill you, they rob you of dignity first. The Harpies, with their hooked claws and ragged wings, were the ancient Mediterranean's ultimate tormentors, embodying the cruelty of starvation and the caprice of the wind itself. These weren't mindless monsters, they were precision instruments of divine punishment, sent to torture those who'd angered the gods by snatching away every morsel of food before it could reach their victims' lips. Imagine a king like Phineus, cursed with eternal hunger, his feast tables piled high only for the Harpies to swoop in, defiling what they didn't steal, leaving behind the stench of decay and despair. But the Harpies' terror wasn't just physical. Their name literally meant snatchers, and they didn't stop at food. Some myths describe them carrying off souls, their wings beating with the same erratic fury as storm winds. That's no coincidence. To ancient sailors, sudden gales that ripped sails or dashed ships against rocks weren't just weather. They were the Harpies' unseen claws at work. The Argonauts encountered this firsthand when they sought Phineus' help on their voyage. The blind prophet, gaunt and broken, begged for relief from his torment, and the heroes obliged. In one version, the winged sons of Boreas, the north wind, chase the Harpies to exhaustion. In another, Jason's crew drives them off with swords and shouts. Either way, the victory is temporary. The Harpies vanish, but Phineus warns they'll return because some curses, like the winds themselves, can't be destroyed, only escaped. What's chilling is how these myths mirror real-world fears. The Harpies' screeches were said to mimic the wail of storms, their feathers stinking of rotting fish, details that suggest they personified coastal squalls or even the sudden starvation brought by drought. Later poets softened them into symbols of remorse, their talons becoming the grip of guilt that tears at the mind, but their earliest depictions pure nightmare fuel. Vase paintings show them as half-bird, half-woman horrors, their eyes hollow, their mouths forever open in a scream that drowns out prayers. So why do these creatures haunt us still? Maybe because they represent forces we can't control: the hunger that gnaws, the storm that arrives without mercy, the justice that feels anything but fair. The Harpies weren't just monsters, they were the ancient world's answer to life's cruelest question: what do you do when the very air you breathe turns against you? The Sphinx didn't just kill, it toyed with its victims, dangling salvation just out of reach before tearing them apart. Perched on the cliffs near Thebes, this monstrosity with a lion's body, a woman's face, and an eagle's wings posed a single, deceptively simple question: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Fail to answer and you'll be dashed against the rocks beneath. But here's the twist: this wasn't just a sadistic game. The riddle was a mirror, forcing those who faced it to confront the very essence of human existence. In the Greek version, the Sphinx was a relentless scourge, sent by Hera as punishment for the sins of Thebes. Entire families had vanished into its maw until Oedipus, the exiled prince, stumbled upon it. Unlike others, he saw through the riddle's poetic trickery. The answer was man, crawling as a baby, walking upright in adulthood, and leaning on a cane in old age. The moment he spoke the truth, the Sphinx hurled herself to her death, her power shattered by human wit. But the real mystery isn't why she died, it's why she asked that riddle at all. Dig deeper, and you'll find the Sphinx's roots stretch back to Egypt, where she was a guardian, not a killer. The great Sphinx of Giza bore a pharaoh's face and a lion's body, symbolizing royal strength and divine wisdom. Unlike her Greek counterpart, she asked no riddles. Her role was to protect sacred spaces. So how did this noble figure morph into a man-eating enigma? Blame cultural collision. When Greek travelers encountered Egypt's sphinxes, they fused them with their own myths of winged horrors, turning a symbol of protection into an omen of doom. Oedipus' victory over the Sphinx became the defining moment of his tragic arc, proof that brilliance and hubris walk hand in hand. He solved the riddle but failed to see the darker truth lurking beneath, his own fate foretold in the riddle's stages of life. The Sphinx's curse didn't end with her death. It twisted into Oedipus' downfall, a reminder that some mysteries are easier to unravel than the ones we carry inside. Archaeologists have found sphinxes across the Mediterranean, from Turkey to Cyprus, each adapted to local fears and folklore. Some scholars argue the riddle itself encodes ancient initiation rites, a test of maturity disguised as wordplay. Others see it as a metaphor for life's inevitable decline, the 3 legs of old age, a stark counterpoint to the vigor of youth. Whatever the case, the Sphinx endures because she's more than a monster. She's the gatekeeper of transition, the shadow at the edge of understanding, the price of wisdom written in blood and stone. Scent or myths pull us into a paradox, being split between wisdom and savagery, their human minds constantly at war with their untamed horse bodies. Most of these creatures were notorious for their drunken brawls and unchecked lust, but one stood apart: Chiron, the gentle healer who mentored heroes. This stark duality forces us to ask, were centaurs monsters or mirrors of humanity's own divided nature? The Labyrinth wedding massacre lays bare their darkest instincts. Invited to a royal feast, the centaurs guzzled wine until their animalistic rage erupted. They attacked the bride, dragging her by her hair, while others overturned tables and smashed skulls. The scene, immortalized in temple sculptures, shows muscles straining, teeth bared, a frenzy where civilization crumbled in seconds. Yet the myth hints this wasn't just drunken chaos. The centaurs resented their human hosts, envying their ordered lives. When the Labyrinth king fought back, it became a battle between 2 worlds, one ruled by impulse, the other by law. But then there's Chiron. Unlike his kin, born from a cloud's deception, he was the son of the Titan Cronus, his lineage graced with celestial wisdom. His cave wasn't a den of debauchery, but a sanctuary where he taught Achilles medicine, Hercules music, and Jason the stars. His body, though equine, moved with deliberation, his eyes holding the quiet depth of millennia. Here was a centaur who bridged realms, neither fully beast nor man, yet transcending both. The contrast between Chiron and his barbaric brethren might reflect ancient Greece's own tensions. Nomadic tribes on horseback, like the Scythians, were often viewed as uncivilized by settled societies. Centaur myths could have been cautionary tales about the peril of rejecting societal bonds. Yet Chiron's existence complicates this. His suffering an incurable wound from Hercules' poisoned arrow made him immortal but in agony until he traded his life for Prometheus' freedom. In that act, he became something rarer than a hero, a creature who chose sacrifice over instinct. So were centaurs warnings or aspirational figures, perhaps both. They embodied the chaos lurking beneath polished surfaces, but also the potential to rise above it. Chiron proved even a hybrid body could house a transcendent mind, while the Labyrinth massacre reminds us how thin the veneer of civility truly is. Their legacy isn't just about hooves and hurled wine cups, it's about the eternal struggle to balance what we are with what we might become. Half man, half goat, and all chaos. The satyrs were Dionysus' rowdy entourage, embodying the wild side of nature that no amount of civilization could tame. These weren't just mythical party animals, they were living contradictions, merging human cunning with animalistic desire in a way that both fascinated and unnerved the ancient Greeks. With their bristly hides, perpetual erections, and wine sacks never far from reach, satyrs were the ultimate symbol of unchecked instinct. Yet their legacy goes deeper than drunken antics. They were sacred to the god of ecstasy, theater, and the blurred line between madness and revelation. In Greek drama, satyrs played a startling role. While tragedies explored fate and hubris, and comedies mocked society's flaws, satyr plays the raucous third act of theatrical competitions, where audiences confronted the raw, unfiltered idea. Picture actors clad in shaggy leggings and grotesque phalluses, chasing nymphs, tripping over their own hooves, and turning even the loftiest myths into drunken farces. These plays weren't just comic relief, they were a ritual safety valve. By letting citizens laugh at the absurdity of lust and gluttony, the performances acknowledged forces too powerful to suppress. One surviving example, Euripides' Cyclops, reimagines Odysseus' encounter with Polyphemus as a booze-soaked romp, the satyrs alternately helping and hindering the hero while complaining about their hangovers. But the satyrs' roots stretch back to something far older than theater. They likely evolved from ancient fertility rites, where masked dancers with animal traits invoked the earth's generative power. Rural festivals honored them alongside Dionysus, their goat legs a nod to the untamed wilderness just beyond the vineyard's edge. Even their name hints at this duality. Some scholars link satyr to the Greek word for semen, others to Near Eastern deities like the Hebrew Sirens, hairy demons of the desert. This wasn't just about vulgarity, it was about acknowledging the primal forces that ensured crops grew and herds multiplied, the most fascinating twist. Satyrs weren't just fools. Some myths depict them as skilled musicians, their panpipes weaving melodies so haunting they could lure even Artemis-chased nymphs into their revels. Others, like the wise Silenus, often called their father, were keepers of dangerous knowledge. In one legend, King Midas gets Silenus drunk to extract cosmic secrets, only to learn that the greatest blessing is to never have been born at all. It's a shocking moment, a creature of debauchery delivering philosophy as bleak as any tragedians. So why did the Greeks keep these chaotic figures so close? Perhaps because satyrs embodied a truth as uncomfortable now as it was then. Civilization is fragile. A single sip of wine, a fleeting desire, and the orderly self can crumble. By laughing at satyrs, audiences weren't just mocking monsters, they were confessing their own vulnerabilities, the goatish whispers that persist no matter how polished the surface. That's why their legacy endures, from Renaissance art's playful fawns to modern fantasies where the wild things still remind us. To be human is to carry a little madness in your blood. The Nemean lion wasn't just another beast to cross Hercules' path. It was a walking impossibility, a creature whose golden fur turned aside swords and arrows like stone-deflecting raindrops. Ancient poets described its hide as wrought by the gods, so impenetrable that every weapon Hercules brought to their first duel shattered on contact. But what's truly bizarre about this myth isn't just the lion's invulnerability, it's how closely it mirrors real-world frustrations of ancient hunters, magnified into something supernatural. Picture Hercules, fresh from strangling serpents in his crib, facing an opponent that shrugged off his legendary strength. No club could crack its skull, no arrow pierce its flank. Even grappling it barehanded was suicide. The lion's claws were said to slice through bronze like parchment. The solution, sheer, brutal ingenuity. After cornering the beast in its cave, a detail that hints at real lion hunting tactics, Hercules realized conventional weapons were useless. So he did the unthinkable. He used the lion's own nature against it, clubbing it senseless before choking it to death with his arms. But the real challenge came after. Skinning it required the beast's own razor claws, a poetic twist that turned the predator's weapons into tools for its undoing. What's fascinating is how this myth might have sprung from actual encounters. Lions did roam ancient Greece before their extinction in the region around 1000 B.C. Their pelts, thick-muscled and matted with dried blood from kills, could have seemed unnaturally tough to Bronze Age hunters armed with rudimentary spears. Some historians suggest the Nemean lion's invulnerability might reflect early armor, perhaps Mycenaean warriors clad in layered lion hides, their enemies' blades failing to bite. Others point to Nemea's geology. The area's limestone caves might have amplified echoes, making the lion's roars sound supernatural, its lair a place where normal rules didn't apply. But the lion's legacy didn't end with Hercules' victory. Its hide became his iconic cloak, a trophy so potent it rendered him nearly invincible in later labors until it became a liability. In one tragic tale, the hide, soaked with Hydra venom from his arrows, seared Hercules' own flesh, a grim reminder that even divine gifts have edges sharp enough to cut both ways. That's the paradox of the Nemean lion. It wasn't just a monster to be slain, it was a lesson in humility, innovation, and the price of power, wrapped in a pelt no blade could pierce but no hero could truly tame. The Golden Fleece wasn't just a trophy, it was a paradox, a shimmering prize that promised power but carried a curse woven into its very threads. Hung in a sacred grove in distant Colchis, guarded by a dragon that never slept, it was said to hold the power to restore kingdoms or doom those who sought it. But here's the strangest part. This myth might have sprung from something as mundane as an ancient gold mining technique, twisted into legend by generations of storytellers. Jason's quest for the fleece reads like an ancient heist movie, complete with a ragtag crew of heroes, the Argonauts, and a series of near-impossible trials. To win it, he had to yoke fire-breathing bulls, sow a field with dragon's teeth that sprouted into warrior skeletons, and outwit the sorceress Medea, who held the keys to both his triumph and his eventual ruin. The Fleece's guardian, a colossal serpent, wasn't just a monster, it was the final lock on a treasure no mortal was meant to claim, yet the myth hints at deeper layers. Some historians believe the fleece symbolized real-world wealth specifically, the practice of using sheepskins to sift gold from rivers in the Caucasus where flakes would cling to the wool. Over time, this technique might have morphed into tales of a magical pelt, its golden sheen representing the ultimate prize in an era when trade routes stretched from Greece to the edge of the known world. But the fleece's true power lay in its contradictions. It was a gilded blessing and a poisoned gift. Jason won it, yes, but his victory unraveled into betrayal, exile, and a death as bleak as the dragon's vigil. The fleece didn't just demand courage, it exposed the greed and ambition festering beneath heroic facades. Even its origins were steeped in tragedy. It came from a flying ram that rescued 2 children from sacrifice, its golden hide becoming a relic of both salvation and obsession. So was the Golden Fleece a metaphor for the costs of empire, a cautionary tale about the illusion of quick wealth, or simply a story to explain why Colchian traders drove such hard bargains? Whatever the truth, its legacy endures because it's more than a quest, it's a mirror held up to human desire, showing us how easily glory can tarnish when chased at any price. When Hercules was ordered to bring back the Erymanthian boar alive, even the demigod must have hesitated. This wasn't just a wild pig, it was a force of nature, a beast so massive its tusks gouged craters into the earth as it stampeded through the snowy peaks of Mount Erymanthos. Entire villages fled its path, their fields trampled into mud, their homes splintered like twigs under its hooves. But what makes this myth so unsettling isn't just the boar's size. It's the eerie way it embodies humanity's oldest fear, nature's indifference to our fragile order. Hercules' strategy was as unexpected as the creature itself. Rather than confronting the boar head-on, he drove it into deep snowdrifts, exploiting its own brute strength against it. As the beast floundered, exhausted, Hercules wrestled it into submission not with weapons but with raw endurance. The image of him carrying the hog, still thrashing, across his shoulders speaks volumes. This wasn't a hunt, it was a negotiation with chaos. Ancient artists loved this scene, painting the boar's bristled hide and panicked eyes in vivid detail, its tusks gleaming as uselessly as a shackled storm. But the myth's true strangeness emerges when we ask why this boar existed at all. Some versions claim Artemis herself unleashed it to punish a region that had offended her. Others say it was a test from Eurystheus, the cowardly king who shrieked and hid in a bronze jar when Hercules delivered his prize. Either way, the boar wasn't just a monster, it was a reckoning. To Bronze Age Greeks, wild boars were genuine terrors. Their real-life counterparts could gut a man with one swipe. Yet this creature was something more, a symbol of untamed wilderness encroaching on civilization's borders, a reminder that for all our walls and firelight, the wild still waits, patient and hungry. The boar's fate after its capture is telling. Unlike other labors where Hercules killed his quarry, this beast was paraded before Eurystheus, then presumably released. Its rampage wasn't erased, just paused, an eternal warning that some forces can't be destroyed, only temporarily subdued. That duality haunts us still. In modern terms, the boar might represent climate disasters or pandemics, natural phenomena we momentarily control but which could resurgence any moment. So why does this myth endure? Maybe because it strips heroism to its core. Hercules didn't win through sheer strength, but by outthinking the chaos, by turning the land itself against the beast. And in that struggle, we see our own, not against monsters, but against the untamed world that refuses to bow, no matter how many labors we endure. The Stymphalian birds were no ordinary flock. They were a storm of razors and hunger, creatures so unnatural that even the gods seemed to hold their breath when they took flight. Picture this, a swarm of winged nightmares, their feathers not soft and light but gleaming bronze, sharp enough to slice through flesh like parchment. Their beaks and claws could pierce armor, their droppings poisoned the land, and their screams drove men to madness. These weren't just birds, they were living weapons, turning the once fertile Lake Stymphalia into a wasteland where nothing dared to grow. Hercules' sixth labor wasn't just about strength, it demanded innovation. How do you fight creatures that outnumber you, outmaneuver you, and rain death from above? The hero's solution came from Athena herself, a pair of bronze crotola clappers forged by Hephaestus whose deafening crash startled the birds into a frenzied cloud. As they took flight, Hercules picked them off one by one with arrows, their metallic feathers clattering like falling daggers. The myth paints a surreal scene, a hero standing knee-deep in poisoned water, the air thick with the screech of dying monsters, each fallen bird a testament to the line between courage and desperation. But what lurks beneath this story? Some historians see a chilling connection to real-world horrors. The Stymphalian marshes were breeding grounds for malaria-carrying mosquitoes, their swarms thick enough to blot out the sun. Could the birds symbolize disease vectors, their metallic feathers evoking the sting of insect wings? Others point to ancient metallurgy. The region was rich in copper, and the clanging of bronze workshops might have inspired the Crotalus solution. There's even a theory linking the birds to early ballistic weapons like arrow volleys or sling bullets, their collective lethality distilled into mythic form. The most haunting detail, though, is their persistence. Unlike other labors, the birds weren't fully eradicated. Legends claim some escaped to the Black Sea, later plaguing the Argonauts. This wasn't just a battle, it was a warning. Nature, once twisted, doesn't easily relent. Whether as disease, invaders, or the unintended consequences of human industry, the Stymphalian birds remind us that some terrors take more than arrows to kill. They take foresight and sometimes a god's own tools to outsmart. The Cretan bull wasn't just a beast, it was a divine punishment with ripples so vast, its rage birthed monsters. Poseidon, furious at King Minos for breaking an oath, sent this magnificent white bull from the sea, a gift meant to be sacrificed. But Minos, dazzled by its beauty, hid it among his herds and slaughtered an ordinary bull instead. The god's retribution was as poetic as it was brutal. He cursed Minos' queen, Pasiphae, with an unnatural lust for the creature, setting in motion the birth of the Minotaur. But the bull's wrath didn't stop there. It escaped, rampaging across Crete until it became one of Hercules' most harrowing labors. This was no ordinary cattle drive. The bull had been touched by divinity, its strength multiplied by Poseidon's fury. Fields were trampled into dust, villages reduced to splinters beneath its hooves. When Hercules finally cornered it, the battle was less a capture than a primal duel, man against nature, order against chaos. Wrestling it into submission, he rode the beast across the sea to King Eurystheus, who took one look at the snorting, foam-flecked monster and fled into his famous bronze jar. The bull, now a symbol of unspent rage, was released again, only to terrorize the lands around Marathon until another hero, Theseus, finally slew it. What's chilling is how the bull's myth intertwines with Crete's own history. Frescoes at Knossos depict bull-leaping rituals, young athletes vaulting over charging beasts in a dance of danger and devotion. Was this creature inspired by real sacred bulls worshipped in Minoan culture, or did the myth emerge to explain some long-forgotten disaster, a tsunami or earthquake blamed on Poseidon's anger? The bull's legacy is a dark mirror, reflecting how quickly favor can curdle into vengeance and how one king's greed unleashed horrors far beyond his own throne. By the time Hercules subdued it, the bull had become more than an animal. It was a living chain of consequences. Its bloodline birthed the Minotaur, its fury haunted two heroes, and its very existence proved the gods' punishments were never simple. They were intricate, inevitable, and always left scars. The Amazons weren't just legendary warriors, they were a cultural earthquake, shaking the ancient Greek world's deepest assumptions about gender and power. These women, said to live on the wild edges of the known world, fought like demons, ruled without men, and lopped off their right breasts to draw bows more easily, or so the stories claimed. But here's the twist. What if these supposed myths were actually distorted reflections of real nomadic women who rode, hunted, and fought alongside men? Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. Scythian burial mounds from the Black Sea to Central Asia reveal female skeletons buried with weapons. Iron swords resting beside bony fingers, arrowheads nestled in rib cages, even golden armor fitted to women's frames. One grave in modern-day Ukraine held a young woman with a quiver of 40 arrows and a battle axe, her legs bowed from a lifetime on horseback. These weren't passive priestesses, they were warriors, their remains shouting across millennia that the Greeks' mythical Amazons had flesh and blood counterparts. Greek writers, both fascinated and horrified, spun wild tales about them. Herodotus claimed they mated with neighboring tribes just to reproduce, keeping only the female children. Other accounts describe them burning away their right breasts, a detail likely invented by Greek men who couldn't fathom women mastering masculine weapons without mutilation. The truth, Scythian women probably used double-curved bows that didn't require such extreme measures, but facts mattered less than symbolism. To the Greeks, Amazons represented every anxiety about women unleashed from domesticity, a nightmarish inversion of their own patriarchal order. Their clashes with Greek heroes are especially revealing. When Hercules was sent to steal the Amazon queen Hippolyta's enchanted girdle, the encounter wasn't just a battle, it was a collision of worlds. Some versions claim he seduced her, others say he slaughtered her. Either way, the girdle ended up in Greek hands, a metaphor for taming the untamable. Then there's Achilles slaying the warrior Penthesilea at Troy, only to fall in love with her corpse, a grotesque parable about desire and destruction. Even in defeat, Amazons refuse to be pitied. What lingers isn't just their skill in battle, but their symbolic weight. Were they pure myth, exaggerations of real warrior women? Or cautionary tales meant to keep Greek girls in line? Perhaps they were all three, because the most terrifying thing about the Amazons wasn't their axes or arrows. It was the flicker of recognition they sparked in every woman who heard their stories, the whisper that maybe, just maybe, the world didn't have to be as small as men claimed. Odysseus knew the dangers of Sirens and Cyclopes, but nothing could have prepared him for the Lotus-eaters, a people so peaceful, so utterly indifferent to home or glory, that they posed the subtlest threat of all. When his scouts stepped onto their sun-drenched island, expecting battle, they were instead handed delicate lotus flowers, their petals oozing a honeyed nectar. One taste was all it took. His men forgot Ithaca, their families, even their own names, lulled into a waking dream where nothing mattered but the next blissful bite. This wasn't just a story about magical plants. Homer's tale taps into one of humanity's oldest fears, the seductive power of oblivion. The Lotus-eaters didn't attack with swords or spells, they offered surrender wrapped in sweetness. Their island wasn't a prison, it was a paradise of apathy where time dissolved like sugar on the tongue. Odysseus had to drag his men back to the ships, weeping and resisting, their fingers clutching at the sand as though it were a lover's hand. What makes this myth so chilling isn't the danger, but the longing. Who hasn't wished, even for a moment, to forget their burdens? Historians have spent centuries debating the real-world parallels. Some point to the blue lotus of Egypt, a flower ancient texts describe as inducing trance-like euphoria when steeped in wine. Others suggest the myth reflects encounters with indigenous tribes whose rituals involved psychotropic plants, foreign practices that might have seemed dangerously alluring to Greek sailors. But the deeper resonance is psychological. The lotus symbolizes any vice that numbs rather than nourishes, from opiates to binge watching, anything that promises escape while eroding purpose. The genius of Homer's version lies in its ambiguity. The Lotus-eaters aren't villains, they're genuinely content, free from the pain of memory or ambition. That's what makes Odysseus' refusal so profound. He rejects eternal peace for the messy, aching work of staying present, of choosing struggle over sedation. It's a lesson that transcends antiquity, reminding us that the sweetest temptations often come not with a roar but a sigh. So the next time you find yourself drifting toward your own version of the lotus, whether it's a screen, a bottle, or a fantasy of dropping out, remember Odysseus' crew, their tear-streaked faces as the ship pulled away. The myth endures because it asks the question we're still answering: is it better to be happy or to be awake? Talos was more than a myth. He was Bronze Age science fiction brought to life. Imagine a towering bronze colossus, its molten veins glowing like forge fires, patrolling the shores of Crete with single-minded purpose. This ancient automaton, gifted to King Minos by the gods themselves, wasn't just a statue, it was a machine programmed to hurl boulders at invaders, heat its metal body to incinerate enemies, and crush stragglers in a fiery embrace. Forged by Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths, Talos circled the island 3 times daily, a relentless guardian whose very existence blurred the line between divine magic and early engineering. What's striking about Talos isn't just his brutality, but his bizarre biology. Ancient texts describe a single vein running from his neck to his ankle, sealed with a bronze nail or plug. This was his off switch, a detail so specific it hints at real-world inspiration. Some historians speculate Talos might reflect early encounters with complex clockwork or even primitive automata. The ancient world had its mechanical wonders, like Hero of Alexandria's steam-powered devices. Could Talos be a mythologized version of lost Bronze Age technology? Others see parallels in volcanic activity. Crete's rugged terrain and thermal vents might have inspired tales of a metal giant spewing liquid fire. The myth's climax is a masterclass in ancient problem-solving. When the Argonauts needed to land on Crete, the sorceress Medea didn't battle Talos head-on. She exploited his one weakness, using her magic to either hypnotize him into removing the nail or convincing him that immortality lay in its removal. As the ichor, the divine fluid keeping him alive, drained away, Talos crumbled like a cooled furnace, his joints seizing forever. It's a strangely poignant end for a being that was neither fully machine nor living creature, but something in between. What lingers isn't just the spectacle of a robot guarding an island, but the questions Talos forces us to ask. Was he a warning about relying too much on artificial protectors? A metaphor for the fragility of even the mightiest empires, or simply a story born from the awe and terror of metalworking, where molten bronze might have seemed alive in the hands of a skilled smith? The answer, like Talos himself, stands at the crossroads of myth and memory, a reminder that even the oldest stories can spark new wonder. Odysseus had survived storms, sorceresses, and sirens, but nothing could have prepared him for the Laestrygonians, a race of giants who didn't just kill strangers, they devoured them wholesale. When his fleet sailed into their harbor, the towering cliffs seemed like shelter, the still waters a respite. Then the boulders rained down. These weren't ordinary rocks, they were hurled by hands the size of tree trunks, smashing ships into splinters as the giants waded into the bloodied surf, spearing men like fish and hauling them back to their caves for supper. In minutes, 11 of Odysseus' 12 ships were gone, their crews ripped apart mid-scream. Only his own vessel escaped, fleeing with the echoes of cracking bones still ringing across the water. What makes this myth so visceral isn't just the cannibalism, it's the sheer violation of hospitality. In the ancient Mediterranean, sharing bread with strangers was sacred, a bond enforced by Zeus himself. The Laestrygonians flipped this code into horror, turning the hearth into a butcher's block. Their king, Antiphates, didn't even bother with pretense. When Odysseus' scouts approached his hall, he snatched one up and bit into him alive, while his queen watched like a diner waiting for her plate. This wasn't just savagery, it was a dark parody of civilization, where the rituals of eating became acts of annihilation. The terror of the Laestrygonians might reflect real Bronze Age anxieties. To Greek sailors venturing west, places like Sardinia or Corsica were literal edge of the map mysteries, their megalithic ruins and towering stone tombs hinting at giants long gone. Some scholars suggest the myth echoes clashes with early Sardinian tribes, whose Nurag towers could have inspired the Laestrygonians' cliffside strongholds. Others see parallels in fossil discoveries, oversized mammoth bones mistaken for human remains, stoking fears of cannibalistic ancestors, but the deeper horror lies in their timelessness. The Laestrygonians aren't just monsters, they're the embodiment of every traveler's dread, that beyond the horizon, there are places where humanity doesn't just vanish but becomes the meal. Homer leaves their fate open-ended. Unlike Scylla or Polyphemus, the Laestrygonians aren't defeated or outwitted. They simply remain lurking in their harbor, waiting for the next lost fleet to wander in. That's why this myth lingers. It's not about triumph or even survival, it's about the moments when the world reveals its teeth, and all you can do is row like hell. Not all justice comes from judges and juries, some of it slithers from the underworld, whispering curses in the ears of the guilty. The Furies or the Erinyes were living nightmares draped in black, their cracked lips hissing retribution for sins no mortal court dared touch. Born from the blood of Uranus when his son Cronus castrated him, these ancient goddesses existed outside the tidy order of Olympus. They didn't care about kings or excuses. They hunted oath-breakers, kinslayers, and betrayers with the kind of relentless fury that made even gods shudder. Their most infamous victim was Orsts, the prince who murdered his own mother, Clytemnestra, to avenge his father, Agamemnon. On the surface, his act seemed justified. Clytemnestra had butchered her husband in his bath, but the Furies didn't deal in nuance. To them, blood demanded blood, and Orst's crime sent them shrieking from the shadows. The playwright Aeschylus paints their pursuit in visceral detail. Orsts, wild-eyed and foam-flecked, fleeing across Greece as the Furies dog his steps, their breath hot on his neck, their talons scraping closer each night. They didn't just want him dead, they wanted him broken, his sanity unraveled by guilt until he begged for the end they wouldn't grant. What makes this myth so unsettling is how it forces us to question justice itself. The Furies weren't evil. They were the law before laws existed, the raw scream of cosmic balance. When Athena finally intervened, convening the first trial by jury to decide Orst's fate, the verdict was a tie. The goddess broke it in his favor, but the Furies didn't vanish. Instead, Athena persuaded them to become the Eumenides, the kindly ones, guardians of justice rather than vengeance. It's a haunting transformation, the primal forces of retribution tamed into order but never truly gone. Archaeologists have found cursed tablets from ancient Greece inscribed with pleas to the Erinyes, proof that people believed in their power long after the myths were written. Their legacy lingers in every story where the past won't stay buried, where sins return to claim their due. Because the Furies weren't just monsters, they were the dark truth that some debts can't be repaid, only endured. Long before Apollo bathed Delphi in golden light, the slopes of Mount Parnassus belonged to something far older, a monstrous serpent coiled deep in the earth's belly, its breath thick with the scent of prophecy. Python wasn't just a guardian, it was a living shroud of the ancient world, a creature so intertwined with the land that its very veins pulsed with the secrets of the earth goddess Gaia. To the people who first whispered its name, this serpent wasn't merely a beast, it was the voice of the land itself, writhing where fissures vented sulfurous fumes and the ground trembled with unseen power. Apollo's arrival marked a turning point. The young sun god, seeking a place to plant his oracle, descended on Delphi with arrow and lyre, his battle with Python less a clash of strength than a cosmic changing of the guard. As the myth goes, he pierced the serpent with 1,000 shafts, its black blood seeping into the soil where the sacred Castalian spring would later bubble forth. But this wasn't just a victory, it was a takeover. Apollo didn't erase Delphi's old magic, he absorbed it. The Pythia, his famed oracle, still sat above the serpent's rotting corpse, her trances fueled by the same vapors that once nourished Python. Even her title whispered of the beast's enduring legacy, Pythia, the serpent's echo. What's chilling is how neatly this myth mirrors real upheavals in Bronze Age Greece. Delphi was likely a center of earth goddess worship long before Apollo's cult arrived. Archaeological digs reveal offerings to Gaia and Themis buried beneath Apollo's temple, while the fissure beneath the oracle's seat reeks of ethylene, a gas known to induce hallucinations. Python's defeat might symbolize the suppression of older matriarchal religions by Olympian patriarchy, a divine corpse wrapped in scales and sunlight, but Python refused to fade entirely. Every 9 years, Delphi reenacted its slaying in the Septirian festival, where a boy fled to the Vale of Tempe, ritually purifying himself before returning with Apollo's laurel. It was a nod to the serpent's lingering power, a reminder that even gods must honor what they destroy. That duality haunts us still. Python wasn't just a monster, it was the old world's dying breath, hissing prophecies until the very end. The Tumeshan fox wasn't just fast, it was fate embodied, a creature so swift its very existence bent the rules of reality. Sent by the gods to ravage the countryside of Thebes as punishment for some long-forgotten sin, this fox had one uncanny trait: it could never, under any circumstances, be caught. Not by traps, not by ambush, not even by the fleetest hunters. Its paws barely seemed to touch the earth as it darted through fields and forests, always a whisper ahead of disaster, leaving starving villages in its wake. The people of Thebes might as well have tried to lasso the wind. Enter Laelaps, the divine hound gifted to Europa by Zeus himself, whose own destiny was the exact opposite. It never failed to catch whatever it pursued. A dog that always catches, a fox that always escapes. The moment these two forces collided, the universe shuddered. The chase stretched for days, then weeks, an endless loop of near misses and desperate lunges, the fox's tail flicking just beyond Laelap's snapping jaws. Mountains, rivers, whole cities blurred past as the paradox unfolded. How can something fated to be caught eternally evade something fated to catch it? Reality itself began to fray at the edges. Zeus, watching from Olympus, faced a divine dilemma. Neither creature could defy its nature without unraveling the cosmic order, yet their struggle threatened to tear a hole in the fabric of fate. His solution was as brutal as it was brilliant. He turned both hunter and hunted to stone mid-stride, freezing them forever in the moment of impossible pursuit. Later, he cast their petrified forms into the stars as the constellations Canis Major and Canis Minor, a celestial monument to paradox. But here's the twist: this myth isn't just about speed or destiny. It's a haunting meditation on futility. The Tumeshan fox didn't outrun Laelaps because it was stronger or cleverer, but because the universe had written its escape into the script of existence. Likewise, the hound's failure wasn't a lack of skill, but a flaw in the very laws of nature. Together, they expose the fragility of a world where opposing absolutes collide. What does it mean to struggle when the game is rigged from the start? Archaeologists have found Bronze Age seals depicting chasing animals in spirals, suggesting the myth's roots run deep in pre-Greek lore. Some scholars see echoes of early star lore, where canine constellations were thought to pursue celestial prey across the night sky. Others argue the fox symbolizes the elusiveness of justice or fortune, always visible, never graspable. Whatever the case, the Tumeshan fox and Laelaps endure because they force us to confront the limits of our own agency. How many of our chases are doomed from the first step? And when do we, like Zeus, have to accept that some knots can't be untied, only frozen, glittering in the dark? Artemis didn't send just any boar to Calydon. She unleashed a living catastrophe. This wasn't a wild animal driven by hunger. It was a bristle-backed engine of divine wrath, its tusks sharper than spears, its breath reeking of scorched earth and blood. The goddess had her reasons. King Oeneus of Calydon, during harvest rites, had forgotten to honor her in the seasonal sacrifices, a slight that might seem small to us, but in a world where gods dictated famine or feast, it was an unforgivable insult. Artemis' response was merciless. She summoned a boar so massive it uprooted orchards with its shoulders, gored farmers in their fields, and left the land barren as winter. The message was clear: neglect the divine, and nature itself would turn against you. Enter the greatest heroes of Greece, summoned to a hunt that would become legend. Jason, still basking in the glow of his Golden Fleece quest, joined alongside the Dioscuri twins, Nestor in his youthful prime, and most shocking of all Atalanta, the huntress whose presence sparked outrage among the men. Ancient writers describe her as Artemis Echo on Earth, swift as an arrow and just as deadly. While warriors grumbled about a woman joining their ranks, Atalanta proved herself first by drawing blood from the boar, her spear strike precise where others had flailed. The moment was loaded with tension, a heroine outshining heroes, divine retribution tangled with mortal pride. The hunt itself was less a coordinated effort than a chaotic massacre. The boar didn't just charge, it strategized, driving hunters into brambles where thorns tore at their flesh, then doubling back to trample the wounded. Heroes tripped over their own spears in the mud, their boasts silenced by the beast's guttural roars. Atalanta, though, moved like shadow and light, her arrows finding gaps in the boar's armor-thick hide. When Meleager, the king's son, finally dealt the killing blow, he gifted the pelt to Atalanta, a gesture that ignited a feud so bloody it would consume his family. But here's the twist: this myth isn't really about the boar. It's about the cracks in heroism. Meleager's own mother, mourning her brothers killed in the ensuing fight over the prize, would later burn the log the fates had decreed would measure her son's lifespan. The boar's rampage was just the first domino in a chain of pride, jealousy, and curses. Artemis' punishment didn't end with ravaged crops. It exposed how easily glory unravels into grief. Archaeologists have found boar tusk helmets in Mycenaean graves, hinting at the animal's cultural weight as both foe and symbol of martial prowess. The Caledonian boar might have been myth, but the fear it embodied was real. Nature, when provoked, doesn't distinguish between kings and commoners. And Atalanta's role, a slap to the face of tradition, proof that heroism isn't born from gender, but from grit, and that even in the ancient world, the most dangerous beasts weren't always the ones with tusks. Hercules had faced monsters with claws and fire, but his third labor demanded something far more delicate, capturing the Sirenian hind, a creature so sacred that harming it would bring a god's wrath crashing down. Unlike the Nemean lion or the Hydra, this wasn't a beast to be slain. It was a marvel to be won, a deer with hooves of polished bronze and antlers that glowed like captured sunlight. What made the hind truly uncatchable, though, wasn't its speed or grace, but its divine protector, Artemis herself, the virgin goddess of the hunt, who had raised the deer as one of her own. To lay hands on it wasn't just a test of strength. It was a high-stakes game of trespassing on holy ground. For an entire year, Hercules tracked the hind across the wilds of Greece, from the shadowed valleys of Arcadia to the frost-crusted peaks of the north. The deer moved like a whisper, its golden antlers flickering between trees, always just out of reach. Unlike other labors, brute force would backfire here. A single drop of the hind's blood spilled, and Artemis' arrows would find Hercules' heart. So he waited, studied its patterns, and finally, exhausting every trick, cornered it at the edge of a river. Some versions say he fired an arrow to pin its legs without drawing blood. Others claim he simply outlasted it, wearing the creature down until it collapsed, panting, into his arms. Either way, the moment he lifted it, Artemis appeared, her silver bow drawn and eyes blazing. The confrontation that followed was a masterclass in diplomacy. Hercules didn't plead or bluster, he bowed, explaining that his task came from Zeus and promising the hind's safe return. Reluctantly, Artemis relented, but the message was clear. Even demigods tread lightly when stealing from the gods. What's fascinating is how this myth inverts expectations. The hind wasn't a monster, it was a relic of a vanishing world, one of 5 golden deer Artemis had once harnessed to her moonlit chariot. Its antlers, said to shine brighter the closer it came to sacred groves, symbolized the untamed wildness the goddess cherished. By chasing it, Hercules wasn't just proving his skill, he was grappling with the tension between human ambition and divine order. The labor's true challenge wasn't endurance but restraint. Archaeologists have found ancient votive offerings of bronze deer across Greece, often near Artemis temples, suggesting the hinds myth tapped into real reverence for these animals. Some scholars argue the golden antlers might represent the fleeting glow of dawn, mist, or even the celestial paths of constellations, but the deeper truth lies in Artemis' fury. The hind wasn't just a prize, it was a boundary marker, proof that some wonders aren't meant to be owned, only glimpsed, and that even heroes must kneel before the sacred. Hercules had faced monsters and madmen, but nothing could have prepared him for the Gorgon stables, a putrid nightmare that had festered for 30 years without a single cleaning. This wasn't just a chore, it was an assault on the senses. King Gorgias, ruler of Ilys, owned thousands of cattle blessed by the gods, their dung piled so high it choked the air, seeping into the soil and poisoning rivers. The stables had become a grotesque monument to neglect, their walls caked with layers of decay so thick they seemed alive. Eurystheus, hoping to humiliate Hercules with a task beneath a hero's dignity, demanded he cleanse them in a single day. But this labor wasn't about strength, it was about ingenuity and the dirty truth behind ancient sanitation. Instead of shoveling, Hercules took one look at the stables and saw an opportunity. Nearby flowed two rivers, the Alpheus and Peneus, their waters swift and sure. With a single heave of his shoulders, he diverted their courses, carving new channels through the filth. The torrents exploded through the stables, scouring every crevice, carrying decades of waste out to sea in a foaming brown flood. The myth paints a surreal scene, Hercules standing atop a cliff, watching nature's power do his dirty work, while Gorgias gaped at the sheer audacity of it all. But here's the twist, this wasn't just a clever trick. River diversion was a real engineering feat in the ancient world, crucial for agriculture and city building. Hercules' labor might have mirrored the awe early Greeks felt toward those who tamed waterways, turning chaos into order. The stable's filth wasn't just literal, it symbolized moral decay. Gorgias had promised Hercules a tenth of his cattle for the job, then reneged, inviting a war that would end his reign. The myth's deeper lesson, cleanliness, whether of land or loyalty, couldn't be half-hearted. And those rivers, they didn't just wash away dung, they carried the stain of broken oaths all the way to the sea. Hercules had endured the stench of the Gorgon stables and the terror of the Hydra, but nothing could have prepared him for the horror waiting in Thrace. The mares of Diomedes, 4 stallions that didn't just kill, they feasted. These weren't ordinary war horses, they were engines of carnage, their teeth filed to jagged points, their nostrils flared at the scent of blood. King Diomedes, a son of Ares bred for brutality, had trained them to hunger for human flesh, tossing unsuspecting travelers into their stables where the beasts ripped them apart mid-scream. The myth paints a stomach-churning scene, hooves stamping on bone, blood streaking their coats like rust, the air thick with the metallic reek of slaughter. What made these creatures truly monstrous wasn't their strength, it was their appetite. Taming them required more than brute force. Hercules didn't just wrestle the mares, he starved them, depriving them of their gruesome meals until their frenzy turned to weakness. Some versions claim he fed Diomedes to his own horses, a poetic justice that left them momentarily sated, their bellies full of the man who'd twisted them into monsters. Others say he simply overpowered them, binding their muzzles shut before leading them back to Eurystheus. Either way, the victory was bittersweet. These horses weren't born vicious, they'd been made that way, their natural grace perverted into something grotesque. Their symbolism runs deeper than simple savagery. In a land where horses were revered as emblems of nobility and freedom, the mares of Diomedes represented the darkest possible corruption nature weaponized. Ancient Thrace was known for its horsemanship, but also for its warlords, men like Diomedes who blurred the line between warrior and butcher. The myth might have served as a warning. Unchecked violence, even in creatures as majestic as horses, could unravel civilization itself. Archaeologists have unearthed Thracian artifacts depicting horses alongside scenes of sacrifice. suggesting a cultural link between steeds and the divine. But Hercules' labor twists that connection. By subduing the mares, he didn't just conquer beasts, he exposed the fragility of the bond between man and animal. After all, what does it say about us when even our most loyal companions can be turned into mirrors of our own cruelty? The mare's fate is shrouded in mystery. Some say they were set free, their hunger purged. Others claim they were sacrificed to the gods, their monstrous cycle ending as it began in blood. Either way, their legacy lingers, a reminder that the line between nurturing and corrupting is as thin as a stable door and just as easily broken. Halfway across the Mediterranean from Greece, in the hills that would one day become Rome, lurked a monster unlike any Hercules had faced before: Cacus, a fire-belching thief whose very breath reeked of sulfur and stolen goods. This wasn't just a bandit, he was a grotesque hybrid of man and nightmare, his body bristling with matted fur, his cave walls adorned with the bleached skulls of travelers who'd wandered too close. Ancient poets described his lair as a charnel house of twisted metal and gore, the air thick with the stench of scorched flesh. But what makes Cacus truly uncanny isn't his brutality, it's how deeply his myth is tangled with the volcanic fury bubbling beneath Italy's soil. The showdown began when Hercules, driving the cattle of Gion back to Greece, paused to rest near the Aventine hill. As he slept, Cacus, drawn by the prized red cows, sneaked into the herd, dragging 4 bulls backward by their tails to mask their tracks. It was a clever ruse, but the beast's frantic bellowing betrayed him. What followed wasn't a battle, it was an inferno. Cacus, cornered in his cave, vomited jets of flame so intense they turned the surrounding rocks to slag. Hercules, forced to fight in a furnace, tore through the flames with his club, finally strangling the beast in a grip so tight it squeezed the last embers from his lungs. Here's where reality bleeds into myth. The Aventine was known for its sulfuric fissures, vents spewing toxic gases long attributed to Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. To early shepherds, these plumes might have seemed like a monster's breath, the ground itself growling with stolen heat. Cacus' name even echoes the Greek kakos, meaning evil, a linguistic clue that he personified the land's volatile wrath. Later Roman writers, eager to claim Hercules as their own, recast the tale as a founding legend, with Cacus becoming a primitive foil to Rome's future glory. But the deeper symbolism is even richer. Cacus didn't just hoard cattle, he hoarded fire, the divine spark Hercules had once stolen for humanity. His defeat might symbolize the taming of natural chaos, volcanoes subdued, wildfires controlled, or the violent birth of civilization from brutality. Archaeologists note that the Palatine Hill, where Romans later built their empire, overlooks the Aventine's smoldering past like a sentinel. Every time they told this story, they were retelling their own origins, a people forged in heat and struggle, just like the hero who walked among them. So was Cacus a monster, a metaphor, or a memory of eruptions older than Rome itself? His corpse, left to rot at the cave's entrance, became a warning. Some thefts even gods can't forgive, and some fires never truly die. Of all the horrors lurking in the Mediterranean's blue depths, none captured sailors' dread like the nightmarish strait guarded by Scylla and Charybdis, a maritime gauntlet where death came in 2 flavors, each more gruesome than the last. On one side of the narrow passage loomed Scylla, a 6-headed abomination with a dozen writhing tentacle legs, each maw bristling with rows of jagged teeth. Across the swirling waters, Charybdis lay in wait, a living whirlpool that swallowed entire ships 3 times a day, belching up splintered timbers and drowned men hours later. Together, they turned navigation into a lethal gamble. Veer too close to Scylla's cliffs and she'd snatch 6 crewmates, 1 per head, or risk Charybdis' vortex and lose everyone. Odysseus, forced to choose between these twin terrors, famously dubbed it the lesser evil, to lose a few rather than all, a chilling calculus that haunts the myth to this day. But what's bizarre is how these monsters embody opposing yet complementary forces. Scylla wasn't always a monster. Some versions claim she began as a beautiful nymph, transformed by Circe's jealousy into a creature of pure hunger. Her 6 heads, each snapping like a rabid wolf, symbolize the chaos of multiplicity, too many dangers to fight at once. Charybdis, meanwhile, was once a gluttonous daughter of Poseidon, cursed for stealing Hercules' cattle and turned into a force of nature. Where Scylla tears apart deliberately, Charybdis devours indiscriminately. This duality mirrors the sea itself, calculated violence and mindless destruction, 2 sides of the same coin. The Strait's real-world counterpart, the Messina Strait between Sicily and Italy, still churns with treacherous currents. Ancient sailors swore they heard Scylla's barks echoing from sea caves, while whirlpools near the coast fed Charybdis' legend. Modern hydrology confirms the area's deadly reputation. Tidal forces collide here, creating vortices powerful enough to capsize small vessels. But the myth's genius lies in how it externalizes a captain's worst dilemma, the agony of choosing which lives to sacrifice for the greater good. When Odysseus opts to skirt Scylla's cliff, his crew's screams as she plucks them from the deck aren't just horror, they're the cost of command, frozen in mythic amber. Later interpretations twisted the tale further. Roman poets painted Scylla as a metaphor for jagged coastal rocks, her head's literal ship-crushing crags. Medieval maps marked the strait with "Here be monsters," weaponizing uncertainty to deter rivals. Even today, between Scylla and Charybdis, means facing 2 dire options, a testament to how deeply these monsters seeped into human consciousness. But perhaps the most haunting detail is this: unlike other mythical beasts, Scylla and Charybdis are still out there, waiting. The strait remains, the waves still churn, and every captain who navigates it faces the same age-old question, not whether disaster will strike, but which kind they can bear to survive. Not all monsters stalk their victims under the cover of darkness. Some slip right into their beds, whispering lies in familiar voices before revealing their true, hideous forms. Meet Empusa, the shape-shifting nightmare of Greek folklore, a vampiric demon who served Hecate, goddess of witchcraft and crossroads. This wasn't some mindless predator. She was a psychological weapon, preying on the vulnerability of loneliness and the terror of the uncanny. By day, she might appear as a beautiful woman, luring travelers into her embrace with promises of warmth and companionship. But by night, her flesh would melt away, revealing a grotesque figure with 1 leg of bronze and the other of donkey dung, her mouth dripping venom instead of honeyed words. The Empusa's true power lay in her ability to exploit the most primal human fears, the dread of betrayal by something that almost passes for human. Ancient texts describe her creeping into the bedrooms of sleeping men, her breath cold as grave soil as she drained their vitality drop by drop. Unlike later vampire myth, she didn't need fangs. Her corruption was subtler, a slow poisoning of body and mind. Victims would wake exhausted, their limbs heavy, their thoughts fogged, attributed by superstitious Greeks to night phantoms, or the ones who pressed down, a precursor to what we now call sleep paralysis. Her connection to Hecate is no accident. As a goddess of liminal spaces, thresholds, crossroads, the moments between dusk and dawn, Hecate ruled the in-between, and Empusa embodied that ambiguity. She thrived in the half-light of perception, where certainty blurred into nightmare. Some believed she was born from the fumes of sacrificial pits, a literal manifestation of miasma, the spiritual pollution feared in ancient rituals. Others claimed she was a corrupted nymph, twisted by Hecate into a servant as punishment for some forgotten sin. What makes Empusa truly unsettling is how her myth mirrors real nocturnal terrors. Archaeological digs have uncovered ancient anti-Empusa charms, bronze bells hung over doorways, jars of garlic and salt buried beneath floorboards, proof that people genuinely feared her visits. Even the philosopher Philostratus warned of her, describing how she'd vanish in a puff of sulfur if confronted with truth or steel. She wasn't just a story, she was a coping mechanism for the inexplicable, a way to give form to the suffocating dread that comes in the dead of night. Empusa's legacy lingers in modern vampire lore, but her true horror was never bloodlust. It was the way she weaponized intimacy, turning trust into a trap. In a world without scientific explanations for night terrors or sleep disorders, she was the answer to a terrifying question. What if the thing you thought you loved was always a monster waiting for the right moment to show its face? From fire-breathing bulls to labyrinth-dwelling monsters, the ancient Mediterranean wasn't just a cradle of civilization. It was a breeding ground for some of the most bizarre, terrifying, and strangely beautiful myths ever conceived. These weren't just stories, they were the ancient world's way of wrestling with the unexplainable, personifying everything from volcanic eruptions to sleep paralysis into monsters we still remember millennia later. The Minotaur wasn't merely a nightmare, it was a warning about greed's consequences. The Sirens weren't just deadly singers, they exposed the peril of surrendering to temptation. And the Hydra, a perfect metaphor for life's relentless challenges, sprouting two new problems for every one solved. What makes these myths endure isn't just their spectacle, it's how they reflect universal human fears and desires. The Sphinx's riddle forces us to confront mortality. The Phoenix's rebirth cycle speaks to our longing for renewal. Even the grotesque Empusa, whispering lies in the dark, taps into that primal fear of betrayal by something that wears a familiar face. These stories crossed borders, evolving as they traveled from Egypt's sun-baked temples to Rome's smoldering hills, proving that a great myth is never just one culture's property. It's a mirror held up to all of us, and here's the wildest part. Many of these legends might have sprung from real phenomena. The Cyclops' single eye, possibly inspired by ancient elephant skulls. The Stymphalian bird's metallic feathers, maybe echoes of malarial mosquitoes or early weaponry. Even the Golden Fleece could have been born from literal gold panning techniques using sheepskins. These myths weren't just flights of fancy, they were attempts to explain a world without science, where a strange bone or a sudden storm demanded a story to make sense of it all. So which myth haunts your imagination? The tragic Medusa punished for a god's crime, the relentless Furies chasing Orsts across Greece, or maybe Talos, that bronze colossus who feels eerily like ancient science fiction? Drop your favorite in the comments. I'd love to hear which stories stuck with you. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries, don't forget to subscribe. Because the past isn't just a collection of dates and battles, it's a treasure chest of tales waiting to be reopened, each one stranger and more revealing than the last.